Hello everyone. Before we begin our descent, make sure to like and subscribe to Hush Ledger. Leaving a comment telling us where you re-listening from helps the algorithm keep you in the dark with us. Now, let's begin. The storm is a blanket. It smothers the familiar sounds of the world, the distant highway, the neighbor's dog, the hum of the streetlights, replacing them with a chaotic, percussive roar. It's in these moments of isolation, when the modern world is stripped away, that we are reminded of how thin the walls really are, and how easily something else can find its way in. Tonight, we open the ledger to 3 accounts of terror born from the heart of a storm. Stories where the power died, the lights went out, and the darkness began to listen. Story 1. The third set of footsteps. I've always loved storms. There's a primal comfort in being tucked inside my grandparents' old frame cabin. The scent of pine sap and decades-old wood smoke seeped into the very beams, while the sky tears itself apart outside. This trip was supposed to be a writing retreat. Just me, my laptop, and the muffled silence of the Shenandoah woods. The first night, the storm hit with a vengeance. Rain lashed the triangular windows like handfuls of thrown gravel. Then, a flash of lightning so bright it bleached the world blue-white, followed instantly by a crack of thunder that felt like it split the mountain in two. The lights flickered, died, and didn't come back. I wasn't worried. I lit the kerosene lamp upon the mantelpiece, its warm, oily light pushing the shadows back into the corners of the great room. The fire in the hearth was still going, casting dancing, monstrous shapes on the walls. I settled into the worn leather armchair with a book, the rustle of pages and the spit of the fire my only companions. That's when I heard the first creak. It was from upstairs. The cabin had a loft that served as a second bedroom, empty and sealed up for winter. I froze, my thumb holding my place on the page. It was an old house, it settled. It was just the wind, straining against the eaves. I tried to read, but the words blurred. My ears were straining, filtering out the storm, listening for the house. Another creak, pause, then another. It was a slow, deliberate sequence. Creak, pause, creak. It was footsteps. Voice drops to a whisper. Someone was walking around in the loft. My heart started a dull, heavy thud against my ribs. I sat perfectly still, barely breathing, trying to logic my way through the panic. An animal, a raccoon, but the steps were too heavy, too evenly spaced. They had a rhythm, a weight. The footsteps stopped right above me, at the top of the open staircase that led down into the great room. The darkness at the top of those stairs was absolute, a pool of ink. I could feel something there, standing, looking down. Then, a new sound, a soft, wet scraping, like a damp hand being dragged along the wooden banister. I had a baseball prop by the door, my grandfather's, a signed Mickey Mantle he'd loved. I stood up, my legs feeling like water, and crept to the door, my eyes locked on the staircase. I grabbed the bat. The wood was cool and familiar in my sweaty palm. The footsteps started again. They began to descend. Creak, creak, creak. I could see the top step now. I raised the bat, my arms trembling. The kerosene light flickered, and a long, distorted shadow preceded the thing coming down the stairs. The sound of rain grows louder. It was a man, or something shaped like a man. He was soaked to the bone, his clothes a flannel shirt and jeans clinging to a gaunt frame. Water dripped from his hair and fingertips, pattering on the wooden steps. But his face was wrong. It was blurred, like a waterlogged photograph, with no distinct features except for the dark pits of his eyes. He smelled of damp earth and pond scum. He took the final step onto the main floor and stood there, swaying slightly, water pooling around his work boots. Whispering, he didn't look at me. He looked past me, through me, at the fire. Then, he spoke. His voice was the gurgle of a clogged drain, the sound of water in a deep pipe. "It's cold out there," he rasped. I couldn't move, I couldn't speak. The bat felt like a toy in my hands. He took a step towards the fireplace, his movements jerky, unnatural. He held his pale, wrinkled hands out to the flames. "Don't mind me," he gurgled, "just warming up." He stood there for what felt like an hour, steaming in the heat, the sour smell of wet wool and decay filling the room. I remained frozen, the bat still raised, my muscles screaming in protest. Finally, he lowered his hands, gave a slow, dripping nod, and turned. He walked back to the staircase, his wet footprints stark on the floorboards. He ascended, each step groaning under his weight, and disappeared into the darkness of the loft. The moment he was gone, the spell broke. I lunged for the front door, fumbling with the deadbolt, and stumbled out into the freezing rain. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my car, the engine and heater running, staring at the dark cabin until the sun rose, gray and weak, through the rain. When Ashley went back inside, the pool of water was gone. The floor was dry. But when I looked at the stone hearth in front of the fireplace, I saw them. 2 faint, damp handprints, already slowly fading away. I packed my car and never went back. The realtor handling the estate sale called me a week later. She sounded confused. She asked if I'd had someone staying with me, a handyman maybe. When I said no, she paused. "It's just." When I went up to the loft to air it out, she said, the whole floor was soaked, and it smelled. It smelled like a riverbank. Sometimes, the storm doesn't just bring the rain, it brings what the rain has taken. Story 2. The Static Cradle. My son Leo was 8 months old when the ice storm hit. They'd forecasted a dusting, but we woke up to a world sheathed in glass, the trees bowing low under the weight, power lines snapped and lying in the streets like dead serpents. Our row house in South Philly was an icebox. My wife, Maria, and I bundled Leo in what felt like every blanket we owned, and we hunkered down in the living room, lighting every candle we could find. The air smelled of wax and cold. The baby monitor, a godsend in our 3-story house, was battery-powered. We had the parent unit with us, its small green light a beacon in the flickering dark. Leo was asleep in his crib on the top floor. On the monitor, we could hear his soft, rhythmic breathing, a sound that usually filled me with a profound sense of peace. That peace shattered at around 2 a.m. The first thing we heard through the monitor wasn't from Leo's room. It was a voice, faint, distorted, buried under a layer of hissing static. It was a woman's voice, singing, "Hush, little baby. Don't say a word." Maria's head snapped up from my shoulder. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the candle flames. "What was that?" "Interference," I said, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. "From the storm. It's messing with the signal." The singing stopped. The static hissed. Then, a new sound, a soft, wooden creak. The distinct sound of someone stepping on the loose floorboard at the top of the stairs. My blood ran cold. Maria's hand clamped onto my arm. We stared at the little plastic unit as if it were a live bomb. Leo's breathing was still even, undisturbed. Then, the creak came again, closer. It was in the hallway now, outside his room. Voice drops to a terrified whisper. "David." Maria breathed. "There's someone upstairs." The parent unit speaker crackled. We heard the gentle, metallic squeak of the nursery door swinging slowly open. A low, wet shushing sound filled the monitor. It wasn't a comforting shush. It was the sound of someone trying to quiet something they meant to harm. It was followed by that voice again, whispering this time, the static making it sound like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "Shh, pretty baby. Such a pretty baby." I was on my feet, a heavy maglite flashlight in my hand. My heart was a trip hammer in my chest. Maria was crying silently, her fist pressed to her mouth. I moved toward the staircase, my every instinct screaming at me to run, to get my family and flee. But Leo was up there. I took the stairs 2 at a time, the flashlight beam jerking wildly ahead of me. The second-floor hallway was empty, a tunnel of dancing shadows. Leo's door was ajar. I pushed it open, the beam of my light slicing across the room. The crib was in the far corner, Leo was still there, sleeping on his back, his little chest rising and falling. Relief, so potent it made me dizzy, washed over me. I stepped fully into the room, sweeping the light, and I saw it. The mobile above his crib, the one with the little felt stars and moons, was spinning. Not from a draft, it was spinning fast, violently, the plastic mechanism whirring in protest. And the air in the room, it was frigid, colder than the rest of the house. It smelled faintly, sickly sweet, like overripe fruit and baby powder. Then, from the parent unit still in my other hand, we heard it again. That guttural, staticky whisper, but this time, it was crystal clear, as if the speaker was right next to the microphone. My not double quotes ... The mobile stopped dead. Leo stirred, let out a small, sleepy coo, and settled back to sleep. I rushed to the crib, scooped him up, and held him tight against my chest, his warm little body a stark contrast to the room's chill. I backed out of the room, my light fixed on the empty space where the voice had been. We spent the rest of that endless night locked in the master bedroom downstairs, the dresser shoved against the door. Leo sleeping between us in the bed. The parent unit was silent, nothing but empty, dead air. The power came back on the next afternoon. The first thing we did was pack a bag. We were staying at a hotel until we could move. As I was carrying boxes to the car, I found something in the front yard, half buried in the melting ice. It was a small, old porcelain doll, its face cracked and smeared with mud. It was dressed in a rotting lace gown. I don't know where it came from. I don't know who, or what, was singing to my son. All I know is that the storm didn't just knock out our power, it opened a door. And something came in, saw something it wanted, and whispered its claim into the static. Story 3. The man in the raincoat ... My brother Liam and I never got along. 10 years my senior, he saw my birth as a demotion, and he'd spent most of his life treating me with a kind of weary contempt. But when our father died, the wool was clear. We had to spend 72 consecutive hours in his old, isolated farmhouse to inherit our shares. A final, bitter joke from a man who knew his sons too well. The house sat on 20 acres of Nebraska flatland, a 2-story sentinel with a wraparound porch and a basement that always smelled of damp concrete and fertilizer. The storm rolled in on our second night, a black wall of clouds that swallowed the sunset whole. The wind started as a low moan in the eaves, building to a shriek that made the windows rattle in their frames. Then, the lights went out with a soft pop. Liam just grunted from his armchair, the glow of his phone illuminating his face in the stark, blue light. Generators in the shed. I'm not going out in that, we have flashlights, I said, my own voice tight. We can wait it out, suit yourself. The darkness was different here. It was a physical presence, thick and heavy, broken only by the frantic sweep of our flashlight beams. The house was full of noses I'd never noticed before: the groan of old timber, the scuttling of something in the walls, the frantic ticking of a batter-powered clock in the kitchen. We retreated to the living room, a silent, mutual agreement to endure the last 30 hours in sheer, hostile misery. That's when we heard the knocking. It wasn't at the door. It was upstairs. A slow, methodical thump, 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 like someone hitting a heavy sack against a wall. Liam's phone lower. What the hell is that? The wind, I said, but my throat was dry. A tree branch. There are no trees on that side of the house, he replied, his voice low and serious for the first time since we'd arrived. The knocking stopped, a moment of silence, filled only by the storm's rage. Then, a new sound, a dragging sound, something heavy, with a limp, weighty quality, was being pulled across the floorboards directly above our heads. Scrape, thump, scrape, thump. Liam was on his feet now, his flashlight beam pointed at the ceiling. That's not the goddamn wine. We stood there in the middle of the room, two brothers who hadn't agreed on anything in 20 years, united in a primal, gut-churning fear. The dragging moved from one end of the room above to the other, then stopped right over our heads. A fine dust of plaster sifted down from a crack in the ceiling. Voice drops to a whisper. Then we heard the voice. It was a man's voice, old and raspy, shredded by phlegm. It sang a single, looping line, horribly off-key, "Clementine, oh my darling Clementine." It was our grandfather's song, the one he'd sung to us, we were small, before the dementia took him. A song we hadn't heard in over a decade. "That's not possible," Liam breathed, his face pale in the bouncing light. "He's been dead for 8 years. The singing stopped. A floorboard creaked at the top of the stairs, then another. Something was coming down. I fumbled for the fireplace poker. It's cold iron, a small comfort. Liam, to my shock, stepped in front of me, hefting a heavy, brass candlestick. Our flashlights were trained on the staircase, our beams trembling. The thing that came into view was a man in a long, yellow raincoat, the kind fishermen wear. It was slick with water, dripping onto the steps. The hood was up, casting his face in deep shadow. In one hand, he dragged a large, heavy burlap sack, stained dark at the bottom. It left a wet, glistening trail on the wooden stairs. Scrape, thump, scrape, thump. He reached the bottom of the stairs and stopped, his head tilted as if listening. He smelled of ozone, wet earth, and something else, something coppery and foul. The man in the raincoat turned his hidden face towards us. He didn't speak. He just stood there, water pooling around his rubber boots, the sack leaking at his feet. Then, he lifted his free hand and pointed a gloved finger, dripping with water, directly at Liam. Liam took a step back, bumping into me. "What do you want?" he shouted, his voice cracking. The figure didn't move, the pointing finger remained, unwavering. A memory, sharp and cold, stabbed into my mind. A story our father told us once, drunk and maudlin on the anniversary of his own father's death, about how Grandad, in his dementia, had gotten lost during a storm. How he'd been found miles away, wandering in a field, wearing a yellow raincoat and dragging a sack full of dead raccoons he'd found, convinced they were the family cat. He'd pointed at Dad and whispered, "You're next, Bo." The man in the raincoat took a sudden, lurching step forward. Liam yelled and threw the candlestick. It clattered harmlessly off the wall beside the figure. The thing didn't even flinch. It took another step, the sack dragging behind it with that awful, wet sound. "The basement," I gasped. "We can lock the door." We turned and ran. Our flight pure panic. We scrambled into the pitch-black basement, slamming the heavy wooden door, and throwing the bolt just as the thing reached the bottom of the cellar steps. We heard it on the other side, a soft, wet thud as it leaned against the door. Then, the knocking started again. Thump, 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 right on the other side of the wood. We sat there in the frigid, smelly dark, huddled together, listening to that relentless knocking for what felt like an eternity. It never sped up, never grew angry. It was just a constant, patient, terrible rhythm. When the sun finally rose, gray and weak, the knocking stopped, the storm had passed. We waited another hour, our muscles cramped and frozen, before we dared to unbolt the door. The hallway was empty. The stairs were dry. There was no trail of water, no stained sack. But on the outside of the basement door, at about chest height, was a single, muddy handprint, and on the floor in front of it, lying in the center of the hall, was a single, dead field mouse. Its neck was broken. We left that house and never went back. We forfeited the inheritance. We still don't talk much, but when we do, there's a new understanding between us. A shared, uncheckable knowledge. Some storms don't just bring back the dead. They bring back the worst parts of them, the parts that linger, and point, and wait for the next time the lights go out. If you have a story you'd like to share with the Ledger, send it to our email. The link is in the description below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more true horror stories every week. You're not just listening. You're bearing witness. Good night.